Welcome to this video of my reflections on the EdExcel Paper 1 GCSE History Exams for 2024. The topics I'll be looking at will be medicine, crime and punishment, and the warfare topics. Before I proceed, it's just worth remembering that I don't want you to dwell on how the exam went, even if it went really well. You should really be focusing on the Paper 2 revision by now. However, it might be interesting to reflect on what predictions came true and what the overall shape of the papers was. If you're a bit nervous about what you did, don't worry too much. I'm not going to be discussing things like saying what you should have included and what you shouldn't have included too much. But if you're at all nervous about that and think that it might make you worry about how well you did, it might be better to skip this video. Anyway, that out of the way, let's get into our first topic. Medicine through time. Let's have a look at what was included on this year's exam. Section A included a 4-mark question like this. Describe 2 features of the new techniques used in the treatment of wounds on the Western Front. There are many things that you could have chosen there. The only thing that I'd pick up is it says new techniques, so nothing that would have been, commonplace before World War I. For 2A, how useful are sources A and B for an inquiry into the work of medical staff at the Casualty Clearing Stations, or CCS, on the Western Front? And then the follow-up question to that. Yep, again, these sources were pretty reasonable. Actually, quite a few people found them quite sad, but that's true. So they looked at first-hand accounts, and I think actually the sources were pretty fair, and so was the question. Section B, explain one way in which the treatment of infectious diseases in the medieval period, 1250 to 1500, was different to the treatment of infectious diseases in the modern period. As long as you focus on treatments there, you should be absolutely fine. Explain why there was little change in medicine in England during the medieval period. And the stimulus points for that were Galen and monastery hospitals. All right, that would seem to be pretty popular with people as well. Question 5, and remember you got a choice between question 5 and 6. There was significant progress in medical knowledge in England during the Renaissance period. So there's the Renaissance again. How far do you agree? William Harvey and the Great Plague. Credit to EdExcel for not including Thomas Sydenham this year and getting the dates right. And question 6, the other option, the role of individuals as the most important factor in the prevention of illness in the years 1700 to the present. How far do you agree? I've only managed to speak to my students so far, and a few people have commented on YouTube. It seems that question 5 was marginally more popular than question 6, but not the huge split that you sometimes get in some years. So let's have a look at how the predictions went. First of all, I identified all of these as repeated inclusions, and sure enough, medieval hospitals, this time expressed as monastery hospitals, came up in the 12-mark answer, so hopefully you got to revise that. In terms of the things that never appeared, well, I predicted the following. And you could argue that this did come up in relation to the casualty clearing stations. So the Royal Army Medical Corps, 1st Aid Nursing Yeomanry and Nursing Services would have had an impact for the casualty clearing stations questions in Section A. But that's more about contextual knowledge rather than them being addressed really specifically. In terms of things that had rarely appeared, here were the predictions I've made. And as you could probably worked out by now, Galen did appear on the 12-mark question. But not only that, my gut feeling about lung cancer and smoking came up. Well, it did. It was in the news recently, and it came up as part of the 16-mark question. Anti-smoking campaigns was one of the stimulus points. It has been pointed out to me that the exams are written quite a long time in advance. Well, that's true, but actually smoking campaigns have been on the government agenda for quite some time now. So again, I'm not sure that that's especially surprising, but I was glad to get those hits. Overall then, let's have a look at the final summary of the medicine topic. Predictions about World War I medical staff, medieval hospitals, Galen and anti-smoking campaigns came true to at least some extent. Overall, the paper had lots of repetition and overlaps with recent papers. It was actually the one that I predicted least accurately on. Continued heavy emphasis on Renaissance medicine is pretty apparent, especially with the 16-mark questions. The paper maybe shows a bit of a lack of imagination in that respect, and there weren't so many of the big topics which weren't looked at in previous years that were addressed this year. Still no sign of the Black Death, for example, but there was the Great Plague again. The pupils I've spoken to and heard from and their teachers are largely positive about this exam and confident in their reactions. Be mindful, though, of higher grade boundaries if the stats show that the paper was so-called easy. Don't worry, it'll still be fair. It just means that you might have to score a higher mark to get those highest grades. But if you found it easy, maybe that's no bad thing. I consider this to have been a very fair paper overall, basically verging on the generous. It had good opportunities to draw on a broad range of knowledge, so hopefully you're satisfied with how you did. All right, let's get on to our next paper and next topic. Crime and punishment. Let's have a look at what was on this year's exam. For section A, describe 2 features of crime in Whitechapel. A nice broad question that. And then for 2A, how useful are sources A and B for an inquiry into conditions in lodging houses? And then the follow-up inquiry for that as well. For section B, explain one way in which the treatment of the crime of witchcraft 1500 to 1700 was different from the treatment of the crime of witchcraft 1700 to 1900. 4. Explain changes in transportation 1610 to 1868. The stimulus points were North American colonies and the discovery of gold. And question 5, one of your options. The most important factor affecting crime and punishment in the years 1000 to 1500 was attitudes in society. How far do you agree? Punishment in public and the Norman conquest were the stimulus points. And the other option for the 16 marker, the work of the police has changed significantly in the years 1829 to present. How far do you agree? The stimulus points here were the introduction of the Criminal Investigation Department, or CID, and police patrols. So let's have a look at what predictions came true and whether we think this is a particularly fair paper. I listed the following as repeated inclusions that have appeared time and time again. And as you can see, medieval community, the hue and cry and constables may have been relevant to that first 16 marker, but only really as contextual knowledge. They weren't called out very specifically. So let's proceed. Let's have a look at the topics which I said never appeared. And first of all, something of an apology here. As many people pointed out in the comments after I published that video, I'd had a bit of a howler here myself. I'd forgotten to include in my matrix the 2020 exam, probably because I was in a bit of a hurry to get the video out and the fact that very few people sat that exam in that year because it was held in November due to COVID. So the topics in blue, in fact, did appear, I'm told, on that paper. Apologies if anyone spent a long time looking at those and they didn't appear, but at least you did some revision, you've learned something. However, the good news is the following did become relevant. Matthew Hopkins and the witch hunts would have been relevant to the 4-mark question at the start of section B. And modern prevention of crime would have been relevant to the 16-mark question on policing. So that's good news. As for the topics that I'd identified as having rarely appeared, I made a similar mistake to the one that I did for those that I said never appeared. Indeed, abolition of the death penalty, I'm told, appeared in 2020 and not last appeared in 2018. But nevertheless, that's still quite a long time ago and it was probably worth a while looking at that just in case. One person commenting on my video said that the Tolpardo martyrs would have been relevant to the 12-mark question, and that's entirely possible. The Tolpardo martyrs were indeed transported for their crimes, which shows the reduction in the death penalty, but I'm not sure they'd be the absolute best and most relevant example to use, but yes, probably you'd pick up some credit for that. As for the next one, though, that's more definite. Pentonville Prison, of course, represents the increase in prison capacity with the reduction in the number of crimes that you could get capital punishment for, and, of course, the reduction in transportation as a sentencing method. So that would have been more relevant to a 12-mark question as well. A final summary and reflection on the crime and punishment paper then. Predictions about witchcraft, modern prevention of crime and transportation were relevant this time. Overall, the paper had relatively little repetition of content compared to previous years, and particularly compared to the Medicine Through Time paper. Pupils largely positive about the exam, generally this being seen as a fair paper with a good mix of accessible and more challenging questions. It's been judged as slightly harder than the medicine paper, but grade boundaries are individual, so they'll reflect this, and no one who sat this paper will be disadvantaged compared to people who sat the medicine paper. It was a fair paper overall. Perhaps again just verging on the generous but not so much as the medicine paper, with a good range of periods and themes studied. Let's head on to our final topic. Before we get into this year's exam, a bit of a confession. I've not actually managed to get my hands on one. Relatively few people do the warfare topic, and so I've managed to hear from fewer pupils in the comments, and I've not managed to contact as many teachers to get some news on this one here. So I've had to paraphrase things at times. I'll have probably got a few things slightly wrong, but I've managed to piece together what the basic questions were as best I can. If you've got any corrections or clarifications, please do put them in the comments below. I'll highlight them so that other people can make use of your suggestions. Anyway, section A kicked off with this. Describe 2 features of why London was a target in the Blitz. And then the source questions were related to an inquiry into the difficulties faced in dealing with the effects of bombing, or something along those lines. It seems that one of the sources was a picture of the fire brigade trying to put out a fire early in the Blitz, and the other one was about rescuing people from the bomb site caused by a V2. Section B kicked off with a question comparing warfare at the Battle of Waterloo and the invasion of Iraq. I'm not quite sure what aspect of warfare was being compared here. Perhaps you can clarify that. The next question was explaining why attitudes to warfare changed in the period 1900 to the present, with the stimulus points being the press and conscientious objectors. In terms of the 16-mark questions, the first option was this. Advancements in weapons was the most important factor in the development of the nature of warfare 1250 to 1500, with longbows and feudal levies being the stimulus points. Again, I might have paraphrased a little bit here, but that's what I've been able to put together. Perhaps tellingly though, nobody was able to ask me what question 6 was. This might have been because so few people did this question. Maybe it was really obscure. I really haven't got any clues, but maybe you can tell me in the comments below, and I would be grateful if you could. Put it this way, I've been searching for this all day and I just don't want to leave it any longer before getting this video out. So please do update me below. If people aren't able to tell me though, it probably does suggest that this wasn't a particularly popular question. So, assuming that all of these paraphrased questions are near enough correct, how many predictions did we get right? Let's have a look. These are all topics that I suggested were repeated inclusions in previous papers. It seems to me that the top 2 topics on medieval soldier types and recruitment would have been quite relevant to the 16-mark question that I do know about, question 5. So that was a good prediction. Here's the continuation of the repeated inclusions predictions. And you can see again that modern effects on civilians came up for the 12-mark question, in this case in terms of the experience of warfare and attitudes. This year's warfare paper, of all the 3 papers that I've studied, is the one that included the most new topics which had never appeared in exams before. So this was hopefully quite a useful section for people. First of all, why was London bombed came up as the theme for the 4-mark question in section A. The composition of medieval and feudal armies was very relevant to the question 5 16-mark question. And I was delighted to see that the Battle of Waterloo and the invasion of Iraq not only appeared, but appeared in the same question, with the 4-mark question at the start of section B. It's possible that some of the other topics here would have been included in question 6. If you know what it is, again, pop it in the comments and we'll see whether I could have got more hits. However, those topics which have rarely appeared, well, they still rarely appeared. None of these topics came up on this year's exam. Admittedly, some of them might have been relevant to other answers while you're writing about them, but there weren't any discrete questions related to them. So let's get to my final summary on this paper. The most accurate predictions of all the paper 1 papers studied were for this one, warfare. This is probably due to the number of new or never appeared topics which were included on this year's paper. Medieval armies, soldier types and recruitment appeared again, as did modern warfare and effects on society. These topics have appeared 4 or 5 times now since 2018, so they're very popular and they do lend themselves to a lot of different questions. Predictions on why London was bombed in World War I, feudal armies and the Battle of Waterloo and invasion of Iraq proved accurate. Again, perceptions seem to have been very positive of this paper, though it might be telling that nobody I contacted or heard from could tell me what the second 16-mark question was. It seems to have been a fair paper overall, with a good range of periods and themes studied, just like the other 2. So hopefully you did well with this if you're one of the people who did warfare. Aside from wishing you good luck with paper 2, it just remains for me to offer you some more advice before you proceed with the rest of your revision. Remember that for paper 2 you'll have 2 topics to focus on. One of these will be a British depth study, Anglo-Saxon and Norman England being one example of that, and the other one would be a European or wider world period study, for example the American West. I've got rapid revision series for Anglo-Saxon and Norman England, the American West and Elizabethan England. I'm really desperate to get superpower relations done, but I honestly can't promise it's going to be done before this year's exam, for which I apologise. It just comes down to the fact that this is by no means my day job and I'm incredibly busy supporting my own students with their GCSEs in my regular job. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to try. I'm going to see what I can get out there, but please don't hold me to it. I will just do my best. What you can already check out though is my paper 2 predictions video, which was released on the 15th of May, the same day that the paper 1 exam was sat. Hopefully my predictions for that paper will prove just as accurate as before, but we'll just have to see. Other than that, don't dwell on paper 1, please, no matter how well it went or how badly it went, although hopefully not the latter. Just concentrate on getting on with the next task. Hopefully this has been interesting for you. If it has and if it's been useful, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me. All the best and goodbye.